Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Geopod. I'm your host Gunnar Woods. On today's episode, I want to discuss some prospects pertaining to United States strategy in the Middle East, particularly pertaining the Iranian problem. And by extension, the resolution of the status quo within the Strait of Hormuz. Now, previously on this channel, on numerous occasions, I've uploaded strategy breakdowns pertaining to the Iranian problem. Good options, bad options pertaining to United States and Israeli strategy. So I will not necessarily repeat and reiterate all those today. What I will do is to paint a picture, what the prospects are, what the options of the United States are, and some of the consequences and potential and eventualities that can bring about, and some of the results that may yield. Now, when it comes down to a resumption of conflict, right, which is very likely to occur, given Iran's and United States' latest rhetoric, given the persisting problems pertaining to the United States-Iranian negotiations, and the ongoing predicament within the Strait of Hormuz, and the tit-for-tat exchanges that have occurred over the course of the past few days. All right. Now, the United States can do a number of things. First, it can resume its air campaign. Now, what this will bring about is pretty much the same as the latest round of fighting brought about, which means a degradation in Iranian launch capabilities, a degradation in Iranian stockpiles, a degradation of Iran's command and control structures, and a degradation of Iran's defense industrial base. Now, that might yield momentary results. However, those results would not necessarily be sustainable on the mid to long term. What the Iranian regime has shown is that it is incredibly creative in reconstituting its capabilities on the short to mid-term, not in the least due to assistance from Russia, China, and to a lesser extent, North Korea. So the air campaign needs to be incredibly decisive and incredibly persistent and truly degrade Iran's defense industrial capabilities to the fullest extent possible for it to yield any concrete results on the short to mid-term, and degrade or eradicate Iran's capabilities to disrupt international shipping within the Strait of Hormuz. We must remember this. If Iran is able to fire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drones at commercial vessels passing through the Strait of Hormuz, it means that it can still, albeit to a very limited extent, disrupt international shipping and thereby disrupt global economic stability. Risk will still be there. The threat will still be there, meaning it will impact the risk assessments of companies whose commercial vessels travel through the Strait of Hormuz, meaning that the problem will persist. So, solely an air campaign that is solely focused on Iran's direct military asymmetrical capabilities as well as their defense industrial base will not provide a short to mid-term solution to this problem. Now, here's another thing that the United States can do. Take control of the islands. Kark, Qasem, Larak, Abu Musa, Tums. Islands that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy currently utilizes in order to maintain its control and maintain its grasp over the strait. Now, that will paint a different picture, right? You remove Iranian elements. You take control of these islands, meaning you are in a better position to protect commercial vessels passing through that strait, whilst degrading Iran's capabilities to disrupt said shipping. However, once again, that alone will not be enough. Why? Because Iran's long-range capabilities still persist, from the southern coastline, from Bandar Abbas, from the port side. At the same time, it will place United States troops in a persistent state of peril, right? Iran will contest United States any United States invasion, any United States boots on the ground, on these islands and on Iran's coastline, potentially. So these forces will be in constant peril, meaning that you will need to allocate significant resources and a significant amount of defensive systems in order to combat that peril. And even then, there's no guarantee that your sources will not be put at risk, right? So any control, any seizure of Iranian assets, ground, islands within the Strait of Hormuz will need to go accompanied with an extensive aerial campaign that will degrade Iran's long-range capabilities to the fullest extent possible. meaning that it will make life easier for the United States troops or amphibious assault forces and marine forces stationed on those islands in the mid to long term. You need to be able to degrade Iran's long-range capabilities, not just momentarily, but throughout the mid to long term, meaning you need to significantly degrade Iran's defense industrial base in order to guarantee the safety of your troops to the fullest extent possible. So the seizure of these islands will go accompanied with an aerial campaign, extensive aerial campaign, primarily targeting the Iranian shoreline, Bandar Abbas, the port sites, which is where the vast majority of Iran's missile and drone launches targeting commercial vessels in the Strait are being launched from. So you need to defang that snake to the fullest extent possible. Ideally, you would then roll up the rest of Iran's launch sites, objective similar to the last round of fighting, whilst degrading their defense industrial base to prevent Iran from reconstituting these abilities on the short to mid-term. Now, what this allows you is some measure of control, right? In that reality, within that specific scenario, the Strait will be opened, and the Iranian Peril 2 commercial vessels will be degraded to the fullest extent possible. The problem, the downside to that is, as I've just listed, significant costs pertaining to ammunitions, your air campaign, significant allocation of resources, defensive systems, to these islands, that will spread the United States defense industrial base even thinner. As I've said before on this channel, United States defense industry currently does not have the capability to replenish key strategic systems at the rate that it would be required to do so if the United States find itself in persistent conflict with the Islamic Republic. And even if the United States is successful in seizing these targets and degrading Iran's military capabilities to the fullest extent possible, it will in practice still be in a persistent struggle against the Islamic regime, who will seek to reconstitute its forces with help from its allies and still pose a persistent threat, albeit to a lesser degree, to United States interests in the region. So that will come at a significant cost. However, plus side, what the United States can do from that position, whilst continuing their blockade on Iranian ports and Iranian cargo, is allow economic costs for the Iranian regime to mount, which will potentially lead to internal struggles or an eventual civil uprising, which is what the United States would ideally hope for. Now, the problem with that is this. Sure, it might divide the regime. Sure, it might allow certain factions within Iranian society or within Iranian opposition factions to rise up, who might take the fight to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on the ground. The problem with that is that, well, first and foremost, the Iranians are prepared for that eventuality. Recently, they've dismantled multiple cells, multiple militias in the northwestern and western provinces, who were trying to structure and organize themselves for assault campaigns targeting Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps headquarters, as well as law enforcement command. So they're aware of this threat, they've prepared for this threat, and they're ready to combat it on the short to mid-term. Meaning that such a struggle, even if it would come about, would take a significant amount of time. Whilst assuming, what I've assumed at least up until this point, is that the United States and Israel failed to utilize or failed to properly plan for the formation of a united opposition front that could take the fight to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on the ground with the aid from localized militias. Now, if the United States and Israel had pursued such a unified opposition front in the months between the 12-day war of 2025 and the latest round of fighting, it would be in a much better position, or rather the unified opposition front would have been in a much better position to effectively combat the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. What we'll probably see, if an uprising will come about through economic despair, is that we'll see loose factions going at it themselves with very limited cohesion, with very limited coordination between each other, which will push the state, push the country into a state of persistent turmoil that will bring no sustainable, long-lasting solution to the current predicament, and would require a much larger intervention of US forces within that particular struggle. United States Special Operations Forces, or the boots on the ground at limited capacity, will always be necessary if you wish to topple the regime in any way, shape or form. Even by utilizing a unified opposition front, to a certain extent, United States troops would still have to be involved. However, the better prepared, the better equipped, and the better organized and structured the unified opposition front is, the less resources you need to allocate to that specific theater, and the less support they will need in their struggle. So that is most certainly a potential conclusion or potential consequence, let's say, of a United States seizure of the islands within the Strait of Hormuz on a degraded Iran and on a crumbling Iranian economy. Like I said, that will still come with the necessary risks and the necessary uncertainties. Now, the most, one might say, radical option the United States has at its disposal is initiating a full-scale invasion of Iran with the sole objective of toppling the regime. Now, by toppling the regime, the United States will kill multiple birds with one stone. It would kill the sustainability of Iran's proxy networks that's spanning across the region. It will eradicate Iran's hold over the Strait of Hormuz. It will eradicate Iran's nuclear ambitions, meaning as well as its missile program, and it will eliminate the threat that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard and the Ayatollah regime poses to regional stability and Western interests in general. However, that would come at a significant cost, especially, as I've said before, if there is no unified opposition faction in place to fill the vacuum of a toppled regime. And we've seen this in Afghanistan, we've seen this in Iraq. If the United States embarks on such an endeavor and does not wish it to turn into another forever war, it better has an opposition faction in place that they can actively rely upon, that has frameworks and alliances and policies in place to immediately utilize and enforce the moment it steps into a position of power. And as of this particular moment in time, there are no signs that such a unified opposition front exists, or even signs that such unified opposition is even remotely on the horizon. So that prospect is unrealistic as of this particular moment in time, meaning that the United States will once again find itself in a country where it stations a significant number of troops will be at persistent risk by various factions vying for power. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps will be demoted to another terrorist organization, similar to the terrorist organization networks that the United States forces faced in Iraq, meaning we will have another long-term, dragging, tiring conflict on our hands that in the end might not even yield the results that we're looking for, especially for as long as radical entities are still allowed to exert some level of influence over Iranian societies, whether as a whole or partially. So, like I said, every option the United States currently has at its disposal is less than ideal. Why is it less than ideal? Because it failed to properly plan for this conflict in the first place. Like I said before, I want to refer you back to some of my previous uploads. I've discussed this all in detail. You can watch and listen to my go-to strategies I would have loved to see employed right from the get-go prior to the initiation of this campaign. Alas, those methods were not properly utilized and didn't come about. So these are the options the United States has at their disposal, and these are some of the prospects that we have pertaining to this ongoing conflict, all of which are less than ideal. Now, the United States can mitigate some of these risks associated with some of these endeavors. For example, it can draw in the Gulf states, create some sort of coalition or some sort of task force consisting of United States, Israeli, and Gulf states militaries who would control the islands on the Strait of Hormuz, meaning that the United States will not necessarily have to shoulder that burden alone, who will make sure that commercial vessels will be able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz efficiently and safely. However, it will not necessarily solve the problem that poses the greater Ayatollah regime or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in general. So every option the United States has, as I've said before, will come at a price. It will come at a cost. Now, that doesn't mean that it needs to sit or stand idly by. No, it needs to act. It needs to do something. The current situation cannot persist. It's detrimental to United States interests in the region and abroad, and detrimental for economic stability in general. So you need to do something about it. What the United States will do, what it might do, is, and this is in no way, shape or form advisable, but it might go after it nonetheless, is it will resume its air campaign, will better Iran to a certain extent, try to enforce more negotiations in the idle hope that a detailed and sustainable memorandum will be put in place that will bring an end to any and all hostilities. That will never come about. Why? Because the pillars of the Islamic Revolution, the fundamental ideologies upon which it was formed, was the toppling of Western influence within the region, the expansion of Shia influence, Shia hegemony, let's say, across the Middle East, and eventually the overthrow of Western-led world order as a whole. These fundamental ideologies will always persist for as long as the Ayatollah regime persists, and by extension the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So the United States needs to commit. That's pretty much what they need to do. Whatever endeavor, whatever option that I've just outlined, they select, it will need to commit to that option. Yes, it will come at a cost. Yes, it will be less than ideal. Because if it will not commit and halts its efforts prematurely, as it has done in the latest round of fighting, the cost will not disappear. Rather, they will continue to mount. Why? Because the Iranian threat persists. And Iran will persistently try to regenerate and reconstitute its capabilities that it has lost in later rounds of fighting. And you must prevent that to the fullest extent possible. So these are some of the prospects, some of the potential or eventual scenarios that I think we might see in the short to midterm future pertaining to the ongoing crisis within the Middle East. If you have any comments for me, if you have any questions for me, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. I have been talking about this Iran conflict for quite some time now, and I'm kind of done with it. I'm kind of over it. I've given you my strategies, my methods, my go-to solutions to the problems associated with this conflict in previous uploads, and as well in this current video. So this might be it for the time being, and I might want to discuss other topics which in my opinion are relevant currently within the geopolitical sphere. So I will try to make more uploads that will discuss these specific topics and touch on these specific subjects in the near future. For right now, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this clip. Reach out to me if you have any comments or questions for me. As I've said before, I appreciate every view. Recently, we've touched on 100 subscribers. It's not much, but it shows that this channel is slowly but steadily growing, and I'm very, very grateful for that. So thank you all for taking the time to watch my content, to subscribe to my channel. I aim to do my best in the future to make better content for you guys, more in-depth analyses, more in-depth strategy breakdowns. I'm looking at multiple software platforms as of right now to bolster my content, to make it a bit more professional. So I hope you see the fruits of that in the not too distant future. For right now, thank you very much for taking the time, and I hope to see you all again next time. Have a blessed day, and thank you.